This week, in the leadership and communication section, how CISOs can talk cybersecurity so it makes sense to executives, firms to spend more on GenAI than security in 2025, Europe leads shift from cybersecurity headcount gap to skills-based hiring, and more. Next, we air two pre-recorded interviews from RSAC Conference 2025 from Cobalt and Fortinet. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
Not all vulnerabilities are the same. A critical vulnerability on a marketing laptop isn't the same risk as a critical vulnerability on a production server accessed by a domain admin missing EDR. Sevco Security shows you these interconnected risks. Sevco centralizes intelligence on all your devices, identities, software, vulnerabilities, and security controls, enriching them with threat intelligence and business context in real time, so your security team has exactly what it needs to effectively prioritize and remediate vulnerabilities based on the unique requirements of your business. Think of it as a to-do list for risks, but less annoying. Find a smarter way to manage exposures. Visit securityweekly.com/Sevco today.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 395, recorded May 12th, 2025. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. I hope everyone had a great Mother's Day with their mom. If you're a mother, happy Mother's Day. All the kids were home, wife was happy, so it was a great day. With that, we only have one co-host today. It's just going to be Mr. Ben Carr and me. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt, thanks. It should be still a good session here. Look forward to some interesting conversation. It was a good weekend. Weather looks like it's going to start getting spicy here in Texas. My wife was saying 110 like by Wednesday or Thursday. So yeah, it's good kickoff to an early summer, I think.
Yes, I think so. So when I lived in Colorado, the Saturday night before Mother's Day, we could always get snow. Here, It looks like the Wednesday after Mother's Day, we get to 100 degrees.
Yeah. Had a nice little bit of rain, like a storm moved in, and then just gonna get spicy right away. So
yep,
kind of crazy.
Guess so. All right, one quick announcement, and then we'll get into the articles for this week. Identiverse 2025 is returning to Las Vegas June 3rd to 6th. It's coming up real soon. Hear from over 250 expert speakers and connect with over 3,000 identity security professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends. Plus, take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new non-human identity pavilion. Register now and save 25% with our code IDV25-SecurityWeekly by visiting securityweekly.com/IDV 2025. All right, so some good articles this week. Too bad Jason's not here because we could have really riffed on a couple of these. However, I start with the first article, and again, I always try to structure these articles, Ben, in a kind of a flow because they kind of sometimes they build on each other, right? So CISO versus so you get CISO versus CFO. Why are conversations difficult? Well, it's because the CFO is talking about money. We're talking about threats and vulnerabilities. No wonder the conversation's difficult, right?
Well, it's look, I think it's almost coming at it from different angles, right? So I think that there's a couple different phases to this discussion. The first is, I think everybody wants to understand how to talk more about the language of the business. It's obviously something we talk a lot about. So that is certainly there, and CISOs need to up their game and understand how to participate at that level. But at its core, right? I mean, the CFO is there to try to figure out how to minimize cost and maximize profits, right? That is sometimes diametrically opposed to what CISOs are trying to do. Not that we're trying to minimize profits, but we're trying to minimize the amount of risk, right? And that results in spending, right? So I looked at some of the numbers that they threw in here, and they were saying, if we have a $4.5 million potential loss with a 5% likelihood of a yearly impact, like that's $225,000. So like, what security control or feature are you going to implement that's only going to cost $225 in a reasonable sized organization, right? I mean,
and that's right, and that assumes that's equal. There is no, the
Yeah.
return on investment is 0% basically. I pay.
There's no ROI, right? Like
Right.
it doesn't. It's just a minimization of risk, and that's kind of been the challenge on the CIO CISO discussion, right? Initially, was that everything I had this epiphany early on career wise when I started going down the management track is every time I put a control in, it was an impact to availability potentially, right? Even just the implementation made there was some impact to availability, and that was a natural conflict between the CIO and the CISO. I think you have the same thing here in the CFO. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you get around it other than coming to a good interpersonal relationship with the CFO so you can kind of have that good discussion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why Jason always talked about one of the first conversations he had when he walked into a new organization. He sit down with CFO and understand how the CFO measures things and how the budgeting process works, et cetera, right? Because if you understand some of what makes the CFO tick, right, it is about maximizing profitability at the lowest cost possible. But it's also what kind of risk tolerance does your CFO have and the business have, right? And understanding that as a CISO is important because I still remember one of the large oil companies I was doing consulting work with. And I just remember this over and over and over again. It wasn't material unless it was over $1 billion impact, right? That was the way they thought about risks because they were, they were drilling for oil, they were refining oil. $1 billion was the material threshold, right? Like, how many cyber events are going to be $1 billion in impact? Maybe we'll get there someday, but we really haven't seen $1 billion kind of event. I don't think. Like, I can't even think of any monetized ones out of the historical cyber loss database that we use, right?
Change, right? Change was so the impact that they're figuring out for Change right now is about $3 billion. That was the last estimate I heard, just under that, right? So it's certainly in the billions. But yeah, I mean, it's, look, it was a $22 million ransomware payment, right? All the cost was in the recovery and the third-party impact and like all that. So I think that's part of this discussion here, which I think we'll dive into the other articles too, is like the impact that a CISO is looking at is not just the initial financial impact of the event.
Right.
It's all the downstream stuff, right? And we've gotten away, or we've tried to get away, we've wanted to get away. Vendors have tried to get away from this. I think some do a bad job of it, of not talking about FUD. And that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, like, I think CISOs want to go in with more concrete data, but it's not. It's always a perspective of what the potential loss is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is all those losses added up and aggregated together, right? So that's a perfect segue into article number 2, which is how CISOs can talk cybersecurity so it makes sense to executives, the CFO being one of them. This one gets into about quantifying risk. So I'm a big believer in risk quantification because it is that common language, right? If I can put risks into dollars and help the executives understand the potential, not just the initial event, but maybe the cost of recovery, maybe the hit to the reputation, maybe a little bit of stock market price flux as well. Like, if you can figure out how to quantify that in an easy way, and I'm not sure. Look, I think what I do at Cybersecurity is trying to simplify that, right? But it's still not that easy of a thing to do. And this article gets into, yes, you should be quantifying your risks, but most people aren't doing it yet.
Well, again, I think we've talked about this before too. I don't think there's a lot of organizations that have really been able to pin down like what's the cost or impact of a specific system unavailability for a certain time. I mean, they're kind of guesses, right? I mean, it was easier when they were physical hard assets because you could look at what the cost of those assets were. Again, asset management being a problem and not knowing that. But I think, the dollar and cents piece is one part of it. But, you made a comment during the last article is, you have to understand what the risk tolerance is.
Yeah.
And it's not just the CFO. It's, go to the board and ask them that, go to the CEO and ask them that. But I think that's also something that's not well understood. I don't think I remember going into a boardroom one and it was, hadn't been at the company very long, went in and we were talking and I said, look, he just said, what do you need to know from us? And I said, well, what I really need to know is what's your risk tolerance? And I could tell that it was like, yeah, they didn't know how to answer that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can we have that conversation? I think fundamentally that's the language we need to develop both bidirectionally, right? How do we communicate what we need, and how do they communicate like what do they think their risk tolerance is? What's the impact of that, and how much do they want us to invest in protecting that, right? There was a comment here about plain language. I think that's really important, right? Don't make this a very technical, metric heavy conversation. It's got to be very plain language. And the end where they rolled up about building relationships outside the boardroom, man, that's uber critical. I mean, you can't do it in the boardroom. It doesn't work that way.
Right. Yeah. Even the questions of anticipating what the board's going to ask you will help you prepare, right? And again, it boils down to what are the most critical risks? What's trending in the market? Where are we, right? And if you can, and it talks about how do we compare to peers, right? This is why I love the historical loss database that we use, because it's actually pulling your industry data sets, right? And so you could actually use some of that data to actually compare yourself to your peers if you do it right. And you could say, well, based on our peer group, we're actually doing better than them. But if you can quantify those, even better, because now they can see the delta in potential risk appetite that they want, but they can also see it in terms of how their peers rank. Like, I think that's nirvana for the board if you can get to that point, because now you're like, okay, we're doing worse than our peers, or we're doing better than our peers, or we're doing better in certain parts and worse in other parts. That starts to give you a way to focus on which risks are most important. Then you can start thinking about downstream projects and planning and costs to see if it's worth making an investment to mitigate some of that risk.
So, Matt, I'm interested, where do you come out on transparency, right? And when I'm sure you're going to say, oh, I love transparency, but what I mean specifically is company A versus company B, right? So I think one of the things that we've done a really poor job, and I tried to push Qualys in this direction as a customer and then internally, Tenable has some of this data too. I think all vendors to a greater or less extent have some of this data,
Yep.
Especially more on the defensive side. I'd love to see companies basically be more transparent with the state of their internal controls. And I think it would help everybody burden up and figure out, like, what's the investment this company's making? What's the risk that they have? Like, I think certainly from an investor side, but also from just the industry, in essence, making it better, not exposing the detail,
Right.
but, the high level, the analytical of like, they're remediating vulnerabilities on an average that's X, right? Or they're, I don't know, but exposing that vendor agnostic data so you can look at it and say, man, this company is really doing things right. I want to invest on them. And then as a industry side, just making sure we're all meeting kind of minimum bars and kind of holding laggards responsible, gamesmanship, if you will, at a very high level.
Yeah. So it's kind of two parts to that. One part is, internal controls and being transparent about where you are and how you're doing. That I'm a big, this is why third-party vendor risk management programs exist. This is why everybody's still trying to figure this out in some respects. But understanding the control posture of your vendors, I think, is super important. Let's talk about the benchmark data. Everybody's tried to do some level of benchmarking at some point, right? I think the challenge is, what data can you benchmark easily across your clients and which ones can't? In the case of Qualys, I know some of the architectural challenges of why they can't do that easily, right? Because the way the data is encrypted and so on and so forth, they can't see it, right?
But that's a solvable problem, right?
Agreed.
I agree, it wasn't designed to necessarily do that, but I think we as consumers of that information need to be willing to share it and need to ask for it.
Yeah. It would be nice to have it. The historical loss database that we use has all that data already anonymized. It's by industry, it's by company size. So I can expose that data very easily based on literally 3 or 4 settings: your industry, your revenue, and your employee size. We have the data already parsed that way, so we can do it very easily on our risk quant work. Having more of that type of data, I think, is highly valuable, though, Ben, because now I can benchmark myself against my peers and be like, oh yeah, we really do stink at this, or no, we're really doing better than everybody else. Because
it's primarily the loss data, right, Matt? Like, not necessarily the control data, but the loss data.
Right. Still lost
Which,
data.
hey, look, it's a great start. I mean, I think super helpful. Yeah.
There's some other benchmarks out there on the control side, but again, the problem is it's kind of rolled up into categories and families, not necessarily at the individual control level. So getting at the individual control level gets a little more difficult because we've looked for this data too, Ben. We can get it at the kind of the category and the family level, but not necessarily at the individual control layer.
Yeah, which can mask a lot of things.
Exactly. It can. Absolutely. Yeah. CIOs pay too much for not enough IT security. Now, we could say CISOs pay too much for not enough security too. This is a very CIO focused one, probably because for them, security, the CISO reports to the CIO, which is another big discussion on the show. But it was an interesting article that nearly 9 in 10 organizations had a breach last year. And they're spending money on security, right? But they're still getting breached.
Yeah, well, look, I think one, they're calling it an anomaly, 9 in 10 organizations having a breach. I don't know if that's really an anomaly or just like the real state of the affairs.
Right.
But the interesting quote in here was like half of respondents said they overinvest in security, while the same proportion admitted they didn't fully use the features they paid for.
Right.
Shelfware, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, you've got stuff and you don't know how to use it. And I think that's the big problem. Like so I was going to mention this in the last article too. It's kind of continuity. Like when you're communicating to the board or you're running internal projects in your team, you have to get to the finish line. You can't like take a left turn at Albuquerque and say, oh, I'm going to go do this thing now, right? And I'm going to leave that. And then half of the features never get implemented, never turned on, and you don't realize the benefits of the applications. I mean, yeah, there's a ton of that. Like that's the dirty secret, right? From I think both IT and security is that there's a lot of overinvestment in stuff that never gets fully utilized, and they don't take the time, or they just really even don't understand the technology fully to know what features to turn on, what configurations to change,
or the overlap in their vendors.
Yeah.
Right. Because now I have a solution. I was on a call this morning with a client. And they were talking about moving over to a platform to integrate their endpoint and their SIM and all this other stuff, right? So what's happening is kind of the consolidation platformization kind of play, right? We've talked about this on this show a lot as well. And so you now have solutions that you might have paid for that now has a capability you're not using, but you're paying for it because you have another solution over here that's doing just that single thing, right? And so you're right. It's not only not using it, but you have overlapping technology sometimes.
From any C-level executive in this IT tech space, that's part of the challenges, right? Like we want more platformization, but we really need best of breed features. And that does cause this problem where you get a lot of overlap and bleed over, and it's just selecting what you're not using. And then, value that the vendor perceives in their product that you're not consuming or utilizing because you don't want that feature in that product.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, I know that story, unfortunately, too well, too. Or that one missing feature that they replace you for because you didn't build that one, right? Yeah.
Or, look, there's a big challenge on the vendor side, right? Like that one customer that's really large and says they'll buy it if you get this one feature that you spend a lot of work on it, but nobody wants it, right? Like it's just,
Yep.
Get customer feedback, bring it into your product, find out what really works.
Yeah, exactly right. Next article, firms to spend more on GenAI than security in 2025. Surprising?
Yeah, not happy about that. Not surprising because it's perceived as an aggregate build to the business, right? Like it's going to move the revenue dollar forward is what the thought is. So, look, let's spend all the money that we want at it. But also at the same time, like while this shouldn't surprise anyone, I think if you dug into this and actually, talk to the people who are responding to this, you're probably not putting the security dollars into those AI projects, which you need to think about that. Like when you're rolling out a project, I don't care if it's AI or ERP or anything else, it's not the ERP spend or the AI spend. It's what's the total cost of ownership. And part of that is what's the security budget that gets attributed to that, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Not done well at all.
Yeah. So what happens now? So here's what's going to happen, right? So we'd spend a bunch of money in these new Gen AI projects without security embedded in them. And then we try to play catch up on the security side once they're already in production with customer data, and then we realize, now we got to go. Now we're chasing again.
Which means you're taking resources away from other projects, redoubling down on that shelfware and the lack of, feature consumption and good security, because you're having to divest resources, time, and money that you didn't have to AI stuff because it wasn't included in the total cost of ownership calculations.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. A really interesting stat in this Thomson Reuters report. The usage of Gen AI increased from 12% in 2024 to 22% in 2025. So it's almost doubled in usage, right?
And the other thing I thought, 60% of respondents reported appointing a dedicated AI executive. Like, that moved really quickly compared to security, right? Like,
yep.
That's, yeah.
Who's your CAIO?
Yeah, we're gonna have to do another pod on that. Who they report to, what the challenges are. Yeah,
exactly. Who they're going to report directly to the board and the CEO. Of course they will.
I'm sure. Yeah, because it's super important. Yeah,
because it's part of the
security. Be damned.
Yep. Business strategy. Here we go. All in. All right. So this is the article Jason would just absolutely love. Europe leads shift from cybersecurity headcount gap to skills-based hiring. So SANS Institute reveals that European organizations are making that shift in hiring priorities. They stop talking about the headcount gap, all about skills, which we've been talking about on this show for at least 2 years, if not longer, I don't think this is a headcount problem. This is a skills problem. And here's Europe kind of leading the front on that shift.
Yeah, and perspective is everything on this, right? So what does a headcount gap mean? So, if I'm hiring somebody and I can't find talented people, I might report that as like, hey, I don't have efficient headcount to be able to supply my demand. But you have people, you have bodies, right? But they're just not talented to do the job you need, which I think is what this article is trying to get at, right?
Right.
That's certainly true. I mean, look, everybody and their brother has wanted to jump into cyber just because of the cachet of it. There's a perception that there's good money in cyber. There was a lot of growth. There was the perception of a gap. So people said, all right, well, I'll move into that area. But the challenge is a lot of people aren't bringing the talent and the skills with them. They're not figuring out on the front side how to develop those or what to go into. So yeah, this is a real thing. I don't know if I'm surprised or not that Europe is leading this insight, or we're just not admitting to it here. I'm not sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, as Jason said, it's all about attitude and aptitude, right? And there's a great quote in here from United Airlines. We hire for traits, we can train the rest, right? So they're looking for specific skills, then they can train them on the cyber specific things that they need, right? And so they're looking for the skill set more than they are the head count per se, right? And this has been this big debate for a while. Like, do we really have a gap in head count? No, we have a gap in skill sets, and that skill set can come from other places and fill those roles that supposedly are still open and being hired for, even though half the time I see those not actually getting filled either. So even the perception of hiring out there is kind of misleading sometimes too. But this is the first time I've really seen a solid shift in moving away from talking about the head count and the gap we have in cybersecurity people, and more about no, we've got a skill set gap here and we can go broaden our talent pool, because if we look for certain skill sets, we can teach them the rest. We don't need them to have it all in their resume, CV. Yeah.
So there's a man, I don't know where to come out on that. That's challenging and fraught with problems. But that's at the meat of the problem, right? It's like, if I'm hiring somebody as a SOC analyst, I can't just hire somebody for the soft skills to be a SOC analyst. Like, they need to have some talent, like some background. They need to fundamentally understand the conceptual stuff. Otherwise, and again, we keep saying we've talked on this before. It's like same topics, different day. if you don't have any background and I'm not big enough to have the bench to train you, like that's just a further draw on my organization.
Yeah.
So only really large organizations can kind of afford to do that, I think. And that really is part of the challenge. So I think we need to figure out, how do we focus and get the right talent on this, right? The other piece I think you referenced was, who makes the hiring and where does it come from, right? 8% of cybersecurity managers see HR as the primary decision maker, while 23% of HR professionals think they hold the authority. Look, I'm going to tell you right now, I have never had the experience where HR brought me great talent. Like, it just doesn't happen, right? And I think the system is just fundamentally broken. I've had some conversations with some recruiters in this area, just at different conferences and stuff. And they're kind of saying this too. Like, it used to be that you would go for a unique boutique talent, you would go to recruiters and have them hire. And now the perception is everybody just comes through LinkedIn or some other job site, forwards resumes. But, you can see that when you go to LinkedIn, you see a job that's got 900 applicants that have applied. The ATS system isn't working. It's not giving the right talent over. When I, as a hiring manager, look at what I get in resumes, it's not the right people. And so it's just fundamentally flawed and broken. And I think that is contributing to this, where there is talent out there, but they're not getting highlighted to the hiring managers to make the right hires. And so that is just this snowball that rolls downhill, builds up momentum. Job seekers get kind of confused, distressed, upset. Hiring companies think they can't hire people, but it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy where we're just making it worse.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, I went off for a minute there.
No, but that's fine. You can, because you're my only co-host today, so you can go off as much as you want. But you are right. Yes. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah, it's interesting times from a hiring perspective these days. Just the whole job market is just really interesting right now. Like, I'm just ready to retire and just do this all day and call it a day. How's that? All right, one last article to wrap up today. When you're asked to meet impossible goals, as a product executive, I'm put in this position a lot. So I pulled this article in because it's so near and dear to what I have to do some days in my day job. And they talk here about strategic refusal to force prioritization, push back on unrealistic demands. So think about this, right? You're a startup. You have so many engineering resources. There's only so much capacity. And you want to build a product. Great. I can build a product using my current capacity and tell you how long it's going to take to build a feature, for example, right? But when you want to build 4 products, all with the same priority and the existing same headcount, guess what happens? Everything slows down, right? Mm-hmm. And so the pressure, especially in a startup organization, to push more stuff out is something I have to deal with a lot and have to push back on, because everything can't be a top priority. And when it's not a top priority, you have to now come up with a priority order, put your resources on those. And at some point you can only get so many things done. Yeah. And that's really what this article is talking about, is the strategic refusal is this methodology of forcing that prioritization. You have 4 things. They all can't be the same priority. Pick one. I'll tell you how long that's going to take. Then what's number 2? I'll tell you how long that one's going to take. Oh, yeah, we're out of resources, at least in this period, because everything's bounded. Yeah,
look, I think that's just applicable for a product-based company as it is for an internal security organization, right?
Yep.
And having worked in both, I've seen it, right? How do you define MVP, right? This concept of minimal viable product, right? And I think a lot of people frame it as like, what's the thing we can get out the door versus what's the thing that people actually are willing to put money and buy, right? And that is a failure point for a lot of companies, right? Because they'll figure out just how can I put the least amount of effort in to ship something and call it a product. If nobody buys it, that's a failure in of itself, right? And same thing internally. Like, I've got projects. Your point is super valid. I've only got 3 resources to assign to this. This project is going to take 4 resources. I can't get it done. Right. And so I think having those conversations, I've started to reframe them as, hey, you want to move things and change direction? Like, we can do that, but here's the impact to those other things. what do you want us to deprioritize? I can't deliver everything, right?
Exactly.
And you've got to be transparent and honest about that. I think the more you do that, and that's the CFO conversation, right? Like going back to the beginning, like money, time, resources. Like, here's the things I can affect. What do you want to give me more of? Or if not, I'm going to have to deprioritize and take things away.
Exactly right. Yeah. And this exists in the startup world and in any business at the end of the day. You brought up an interesting point. MVP, minimal viable product, does not equate to product market fit.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people miss that. Just because it's minimally viable doesn't mean that it fits the market need either. And product market fit, I'm just telling, it's so hard to get to some days.
But Matt, we can start there and like grow the product features over time, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah, but if I can't sell 1.0, like,
Yeah.
how does that get me to 1.5 or 2.0, right? Like, it doesn't, sometimes people don't understand that bridge. Frequently.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Ben, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. Stay tuned. We have 2 RSAC Conference 2025 interviews from Cobalt and Fortinet coming up next. We'll see you all next week on Business Security Weekly.
Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today.
Welcome to RSAC Conference 2025. We're here recording live from the CyberRisk TV studio and Broadcast Alley at Moscone West. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me for this interview is Derek Manky, Chief Security Strategist and Global VP Threat Intelligence, Fortinet's FortiGuard Labs at Fortinet.
You nailed it.
Welcome, Derek. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you? Yeah, good to see you again.
I always look forward to our conversation, so I was excited to see that I'd have an opportunity to chat with you about the latest report. And we've been getting a lot of reports lately, and it's very interesting. It seems like everybody's pretty much on the same page, except one vendor I won't mention. They put out a video this morning, and it was almost exactly the opposite of everything we saw in Verizon's DBIR report. So I was
okay.
I don't know what happened there. They must have different sample data, right? Like everybody's got different data sets that they're looking at.
Yeah.
But kicking things off here. One of the things, you put these out twice a year still, right?
This is an annual, so we took a bit of a different focus this time. Actually, we refactored the approach quite a bit.
Okay.
So it's an annual view and scope. And we also broke this down from an attacker's point of view. So we went through the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So each phase of that, what is FortiGuard Labs seeing? So we sort of framed it into the life cycle of an attacker and trends around that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. And, one of the things I'm always interested in, because you're looking at a lot of this on a day-to-day perspective, but then you put together these reports. Are there ever surprises when you put together the report, or you already pretty much know what the report's going to look like before you put it together?
It's a mix, I would say. There's things that are not surprises. There's baselines we have, of course. So there's things that I fully expect. Like sort of that holding the line approach, because we do talk about this obviously throughout the year. So there's things that are not surprises, but inevitably we do find something that would be a little bit anomalous, right? Above that baseline too. Yeah.
And what are some of the high points, some of the things that, because we have seen some trends shift. I don't think everything is just up and to the right anymore. There have been some shifts in behavior.
Yep.
So maybe hit me with some of the high level ones, and maybe we can dive deep into some of those.
Sure. Yeah. If we look at the, so a couple of things, right? I think the the speed at which we're seeing the shift left. So we talk about shifting left a lot.
Yeah.
So more of the reconnaissance phase. We've talked about it. It's been more tactical with ransomware and things like that in the past. If you look at the report, there's been a lot of activity and focus on that. One of our lead points was just on that external attack surface management from an attacker's point of view.
Right.
So scanning, we see on average 36,000 scans per second. It was an 18% increase from last year, which was a clear indication of more of a focus on finding, mapping that surface, and then ultimately weaponizing it as well too. So that was a surprise because I wouldn't expect to see it that big. The other surprise, quite frankly, was on the weaponization. So second phase, we talk about vulnerabilities in 0 days all the time. There were 39% increase in CVEs. So that's in the industry, and 40,000 last year. That was a surprise to me as well, honestly. I knew it was going to be bigger. We're tracking usually a 5% growth metric, but almost 40%, that's an explosion. So that was very surprising. But what we saw in the report was it's not all doom and gloom either, in a sense that, yes, that's a lot of CVEs out there. But at the same time, we saw only around 300 out of those 40,000 0 days weaponized.
Yeah.
So it's encouraged. Like the trend is less on the 0 days, but the bad news is more of a shift into living off the land techniques.
And I imagine this stuff connects, right? Like the 300 out of that 40,000 you're seeing. I imagine there's a reason the scans are going on all the time, right? Like a lot of these are edge devices. And the moment somebody sees it, there's a script that's just going to grab that initial access, right? That's going to exploit that, whatever it is, a VPN device, externally exposed management interface. Why do people still do that? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's very much an end day game, not a 0 day game. That was a takeaway from the report. Automation, as you said, like with the scanning. And that's the other thing that we saw in the report. So it's interesting, Adrian, because we walked through, as I said, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We're seeing that framework, the tactics being chained together now. So multi-stage attacks. The cloud, for the first time in this report, we had CNAP and cloud data, and it's the same thing in the cloud that we're seeing too.
Yeah. And it's, as attackers automate more, I imagine that's where we got to go as defenders as well, right?
Yep.
So you were talking about speed, and when you said that, the first thing I think about is how fast do we need to move? Like when, and that's another metric I've been seeing from a lot of these reports is, some idea of here's when you can expect exploitation when this vulnerability is disclosed.
Yeah.
And it's that timetable is getting super short.
It is.
It seems like you cannot wait on vulnerability scan results to start acting on something.
And you're absolutely right. So we call it the TTE, the time to exploit. And that metric is now in the days. We're continuing to see big campaigns that are weaponized, not just from one attacker, but multiple attackers within that week, typically less than 6 days. So, and it's not just about the speed of weaponizing vulnerabilities, it's that whole attack chain, right? So the exploitation of the vulnerability is one thing, but now we're seeing I'm actually speaking on Thursday this week about an AI-enabled cybercrime. So we are seeing weaponization of AI to act as a catalyst to speed that whole chain up, right? To get credentials quicker through things like tools like Fraud GPT, Worm GPT, which don't have ethical restrictions like ChatGPT does, right? So all of those things combined, the tooling is allowing not just the weaponization of end days of vulnerabilities, but that whole chain, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, seeing some of the other shifts in what's being targeted. It looks like, it's been somewhat a slow trend. Like there's many ways to trigger a ransomware request.
Yep.
It started with encryption of data, and then we saw theft of data.
Yep.
And it seems like it's been shifting towards impacting operations.
Yes.
And so this is all leading to my guess that targeting specific industries is maybe going after industries where you can exert more pressure by impacting operations.
Yeah. So that's the tactical shift. It's a funnel, right? So what do I mean by funnel? It's just it's always the inverse of the knock and the SOC of what we're doing in security, right? So from their point of view, they're doing attack surface management. They're looking, they're scanning that attack surface. They're sending out billions of scans. We saw almost a trillion, actually. It's 993 billion that we saw last year. And then they're funneling that into what's the interesting target that I can use for, so they're applying their own intelligence to that, right? To find those targets that contextualize into big targets, big revenue organizations and specifically manufacturing. That was for the second year in a row. So that wasn't a surprise to me, but it's holding steady. 17% of all verticals we saw was manufacturing for ransom attacks because it's business continuity and operations.
And it makes sense. I'm hearing that ransomware events are still numerous. Like we're not seeing a big drop there. But we are seeing a drop in the number of people paying. So I guess it makes sense to put more pressure on the people most likely to pay, right?
Yes.
Where it's really going to hit them immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And it is those large scale operations. And, as I said, it's not just manufacturing. We're seeing also healthcare. We're seeing retail, right? Those are the other top targets we see too.
Oh yeah. Human health. Absolutely. Yeah. Like that's, almost industries where it almost looks irresponsible not to do whatever you can to get back up and running as quickly as possible. Yeah. And that's, it seems like that continues to be an ethical quandary, like there are people out there that, even talking about regulations and laws that make it illegal to pay a ransom, or at least we do have some stuff now where you have to notify if you pay one. But, having some empathy here, you see so many cases where, I can't fault them for trying to get back up and running as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a fine line. And that's why, it's so important to try to, we talk about in the CISO world, risk mitigation all the time, but that's why it's so important to take, just like the attackers are shifting more left, being more proactive, right? We've talked about proactive security, but that whole landscape has changed now too, right? It's not just about theoretical situations or scenarios or your typical phishing employees, to get their security awareness and hygiene better.
We've got all this data now. That's something I've been saying until I'm blue in the face is we don't have to guess anymore.
No.
Like our best practices used to be based on guess. Like changing passwords every 90 days seems like a good idea.
Right.
We learn different, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we're in a place now, partially due to ransomware activities being so successful, that we have some really good ideas of what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. And it's proven too. I mean, obviously now we have, think of something like zero trust. That was a concept, 5 plus years ago. Now it's a reality. There are real solutions.
We're seeing successes.
And it works. It works. It's in the name. Right? And that combined with CTEM now and continuous threat exposure management. So breach and attack simulation, because we know the playbook of the attacker, simulating real world attacks. We don't have to just do tabletop exercises. You can launch us against networks, see how your security posture is. So it's a threat informed defense approach. And then build security around
the gaps are. Earlier I was talking about you can't wait until the scan tells you that you've got a vulnerability, and we're talking about the time to exploitation. And this is something I often talk about are scan-led approaches, which is fine for compliance, for PCI, for stuff like that, and intel-led approaches.
Right.
And I imagine that goes for more than just vulnerability intelligence, but threat intelligence in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can probably guess, I'm a big fan of the intelligence-led approach. I mean, leading our intelligence department at Fortinet, FortiGuard Labs. But that's the approach we take. I mean, look, you can have great detections and intelligence, but if it's not actionable, it's just intelligence sitting there. You can have a great platform without intelligence and it's bare metal. It's unable to act on that. So you absolutely need that converged intelligence approach. That's where the world of agentic AI, you hear a lot about that now, especially at this conference, but there's real implementations of that, of being able to act on not generative AI, but discriminative AI to have localized learning to speed up the autonomous response. There are implementations happening like that. We've done it in our security fabric as well.
So again, automation, as attacks get quicker, we can't move at human speed anymore.
No, and you can't.
We've got to find ways to automate.
Yeah, and you can't, hire your way out of the problem, because there's a skills gap, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just going to bloat your OpEx. So using technology like that, it upskills the analysts, it offloads workload that an analyst would otherwise have to do. It avoids analyst burnout, which is a real issue today. So there's a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like the most about this AI trend in general, is it does seem like it can erase some of the stuff that humans hate to do.
Yes.
Your eyes gloss over, you start making mistakes. And I really hope to see it addressing a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and it's like any new technology, when it kind of comes into full force, there's a lot of speculation, there's uncertainty, there's some fear sometimes. Is this going to replace my job?
Yeah.
But it's not the reality, right? The reality is we're seeing a lot of success where it's actually, like I said, upskilling analysts. There's a warm reception to it. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have a CISO playbook in here.
Yep.
So I haven't been able to dig into that yet. So tell me a little bit about your reports. Always have great takeaways, recommendations, stuff like that. Tell me about the playbook.
Yeah, so the playbook is, it's really talking about a continuous approach, right? Because we live in the world of AI automation, we can do things at speed and scale, and that's important from a security posture. So it's not a once a year penetration test. Did you check all the boxes? Okay, I'm secure for another year. Because the attackers are moving so fast, that doesn't sit well in the CISO playbook today. So in the CISO playbook, we talk about CTEM, continuous threat exposure management. Yep. Really, I think we've talked about the work we've done with MITRE before, the Center for Threat Informed Defense. Threat Informed Defense is the same idea, right? So CTEM just takes threat informed defense and it puts it into a continuous cycle. Yeah. So it's doing the attack surface management, EASM, external attack surface management. This is all in the CISO playbook. So by a dark web, are people targeting your brand? Is there a phishing site impersonating you? Are stolen credentials being sold? Those sorts of things, that alerts can be proactively generated. Same thing with IASM, the internal attack surface management. That's the vulnerabilities and exposures and so forth. Right. Those sorts of things. So the pen test angle is important, but then there's also the purple teaming element. So this is using adversarial exposure validation. It's breach and attack simulation, running those real world attacks, and then seeing what your security posture is from that. So in the playbook, it's really about running those purple teaming exercises with gear, of course, gear to support that, doing it at speed and scale continuously. So it's not just one adversary, you're continuing to build those playbooks, run that intelligence-led approach. So that's a key part we talk about. It's the refactored continuous security posture built around intelligence and the adversary that we know.
And I think that's the biggest thing I see missing are these feedback loops. Where sure, maybe it's logged somewhere in your system, but that doesn't count if a human doesn't see it and act upon it.
Yeah.
Or if maybe in the future it is more machines seeing it and acting upon it. But anybody can just turn all logging up to 11 and say that they detected an attack. But doesn't count if you can't use it.
Yeah, and so this is the other element of the CISO playbook is the AI piece, of course. But I just want to stress it's not just the generative AI and the large language models.
Yeah.
So if you look at the way we've implemented AI, we have it the agentic AI piece, which is sitting on premises. It's on the endpoint. It's in the cloud. It's on the network, the NDR device, and so forth. It's in the SOAR as well. But then you have the generative AI, we call it FortiAI, which is that large language model interface to the analyst. Yeah. So those engines are doing the heavy lift, the stuff that an analyst would have to do to find, you don't have to turn the logging up to 11, it can find those logs. But then it uplifts that intelligence into the large language models so that they can have that natural conversation with the analyst. It helps NOC and SOC convergence with that. So it's that. I look at generative AI as in the CISO playbook as that single pane of glass into all the operations between the NOC and the SOC happening.
Yeah. More easy to use interface.
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully people need less training to figure out how to use.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The on-ramp is less as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Derek. Always a fun conversation with you. Always enjoy reading the reports.
Yeah.
Looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our next conversation. There's good progress being made.
Yeah. To find out more about Fortinet, you can visit securityweekly.com/Fortinet RSAC. For all RSAC 2025 coverage by Cyber Risk Alliance, you can visit securityweekly.com/RSAC. Thanks again, Derek. Derek.
The threat landscape is constantly evolving, making it nearly impossible for security teams to keep up. That's why so many top companies turn to Tines, a security orchestration and automation platform built by security practitioners for security practitioners. Tines empowers analysts and engineers to automate their most repetitive, time-consuming tasks. No coding expertise required, just the flexibility to tailor workflows to your team's exact needs. Ready to break free from the limitations of traditional tools? Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tines.
Welcome back to RSAC Conference 2025. We are broadcasting in Broadcast Alley at the Cyber Risk TV studio. This is Moscone West for those of you who are in town. I am the co-host of Paul Security Weekly, Jeff Mann, and I am here today to talk to Gunter Ollmann, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Cobalt. Gunter, welcome.
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
How's your RSA so far?
RSA, like, this is what, year number 20 of this stuff?
Yeah.
Right? Got comfortable shoes now.
Good, comfortable shoes. You've learned how to pace yourself.
Right, exactly.
I haven't even made it to the vendor area yet. Have you poked your head in yet?
I have. It's bigger than ever, and there's a lot of money on show.
Yeah. Easy to navigate for the beginner, right?
Yes. I prefer walking around the edges, seeing all the brand new startups, right?
Yeah, the best companies are at the edges, I've found. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into what we now call cybersecurity?
Cybersecurity. I think I've been you can tell by the gray hairs, I've been there for a long, long time, right? So, probably before it was cybersecurity. And
if I had hair, it'd be gray.
There you go, Yeah, I mean, hacking since, from ISDN days before that. But I've been doing this pen testing, the offensive side for so many years. I sort of say I probably spent about half my career trying to be better at the bad guys stuff than the bad guys, and then, yin yang back to the other side of figuring out how to detect and stop people like me. Mm-hmm. But it's about 3 decades now of this stuff.
So I always like to, on the show when we're talking terminology, especially controversial terminology like penetration testing, just to sort of level set for the purpose of the discussion and for our audience, how does Cobalt define a penetration test in the moment right now?
Well, there's a lot of varieties. Goals and objectives. I think key things for me for penetration testing is the penetration piece, really, right? So you can take all that vulnerability scanning, vulnerability assessment, give me that spectrum of what's out there, what should I care about. Go deal with those TP, the true positive, false positives,
right.
Start dialing it in, right? Like those things can be discovered through automated tools, and as a pen tester, you run those automated tools, but that's where you start from, right? And so when I look at pen tester and defining pen testing, it really is, how do I, identify those vulnerabilities that are actually going to be exploitable?
Right.
How do I put them into the context of, of threat and risk, and then verify them, right? And as a pen tester, one of the things I actually want to try to do is to pop boxes, right? Actually prove that I can get through there. That's
but there's no boxes anymore. There's just,
virtual
boxes. Clouds.
It's just someone else's computer, don't they say, right?
You speak my language. Popping boxes, getting root, doing the root dance.
But I think one thing to be careful about is this whole red team thing, right? And I think the red team part really is a lot of mixed terminology there.
Right.
But I do think that, pen testing today is maybe less stealthy, right? I think that's probably about the only real change between the definitions, I think.
Gotcha. So Cobalt does a pen test report. Is that an annual thing?
It is an annual thing, but this time, the company's been around for over decades. We do about a little over 5,000 pen tests a year. Okay. And so we released a report for the last 10 years. And so a lot of brand new types of insights, right? I think we always talk about, what happened last year and what minor things went up and down. But we actually step back and look at a decade of pen testing, and tens of thousands.
You were taking the big picture look this time around.
But, tens of thousands of pen tests,
right.
Plus, thousands and thousands of customers. Different level of insight, right?
To what degree, I'm I guess you probably can't prove this in any empirical way, but to what degree do you think your findings from actual pen tests reflect sort of the entire world, the entire spectrum? Do you think it's fairly consistent and typical with what everybody's doing wrong and everybody's doing right?
I believe so. Right.
Okay.
Cobalt
It's
premier
enough of
provider.
a population size.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Draw some conclusions.
again, talking about thousands of pen tests every year for thousands of customers worldwide.
Right.
It really does give that very broad spectrum. Yeah. But to be said, the vast majority of those pen tests are the more traditional web app, API mobile pen tests. Right. It's still over half the sort of pen testing that's out there in the market. A lot of innovation, a lot of work in that sort of space.
Right.
But you still see the same classes of threats. I wrote my first paper on cross-site scripting and first paper on the SQL injection back in 2002. And that's still
probably the late 1900s.
and that's still the number one threats you see, right?
Yeah. It's amazing how that is true, and for all the investment that there is in defense. But that's probably another topic for strong patient.
Well, I think it'll be very interesting to see how all these AI tools that are used for developing code,
Right.
And as people sort of move into this sort of vibe coding program, whether it actually fundamentally changes the nature of the flaws, or we just we find the same number of SQL injection. Now we just have something that's more common because of the AI systems, right?
Yeah, so that's a big wild card, I guess. Obviously the theme this year at RSAC is AI, and everybody has their angle on it and their pitch on it. But this is the first time I'm having a conversation specifically about penetration testing and that whole aspect of security. Your report this year, does it have findings that are related to what you're starting to see? The impact that AI is having out there?
Absolutely, right. So we've done hundreds and hundreds now of AI pen tests and our own pen tests in particular, right? So you've seen that evolution of what was a web application, and then over the last 2 years, people added those chatbots, and those chatbots are now developed into more sophisticated AI agents and AI systems.
So they're the target of your pen test, is what you're saying?
This is the scope of the web apps. It's sort of changed and grown, but it requires a specialized tool set, specialized methodologies to dive deep. And so what we're seeing is many more new vulnerabilities in that sort of LLM space, right? And I think one of the more interesting things, if you look at the view from the pen testing report in particular, is the nature of the vulnerabilities, but how long it takes to fix these things, right? And in many ways, you sort of think that AI being a much more newer technology, a much faster development cycle.
Right.
Why are those vulnerabilities, taking longer to fix than the more traditional vulnerabilities?
Still seems like we're losing. How are you able to use AI now as a tool, as a pen testing tool?
Correct. Yeah. So, across the industry, what we're seeing, I think, if I look at the tools that pen testers use, year on year they get smarter. Right. There's been automation, correlation between the results. We're using more threat intelligence, bringing those things together. In the last year, applying AI into those systems to be more predictive, right? About instead of trying to fuzz your way through everything, let's provide some AI based on these learnings. So I think the tools are getting smarter. What I'm really excited about is the pen testers themselves. The tools are not good enough for the environments that are being built, and so the smarter pen testers are the ones that have always built their own tools. And I'm seeing many of the gray-haired crowds like, this is great. Last time I had to do this was 15 years ago for, everything became, Web 2.0 and da-da-da, and I did develop all these types of tools. And then cloud, and now I'm going to do, go develop a new range of, AI tools that help me find vulnerabilities faster and more, and help me find the spaces where I should be targeting.
Right. Have you, is this thing, we should have defined AI, but we don't have enough time. Is this thing that we're calling AI and its impact on the world, and is it creating new categories of vulnerabilities, or is it just enumerating the class, I'm thinking like OWASP top 10 type stuff. Is it just enumerating in a much greater way the things we know about?
Somewhere in between.
Okay.
Right? I think the nature of the vulnerabilities has to see that find in the AI and LLM. First of all, there's a whole big class of vulnerabilities that are all about the supply chain of that. How was it built, and so what does that DevOps pipeline really look like? Where are the vulnerabilities in it? But you can say that for pretty much any type of web application or modern development cycle.
Right.
But I think the parts that we're seeing that people are struggling with is this is often a new open source black box.
Right.
I'm going to drop this thing in there, right? And it has a number of vulnerabilities. They're more difficult to discover, typically, inside this particular box. But because the box is a lot of vectors and a lot of math, your ability to actually patch these things and fix these things isn't there. And so I think many organizations are still stumbling to try to figure out, how do I layer my defenses around this thing? Because, it's a new generation of open source problems.
Right. Well, that was kind of going to be my next question was, what is AI doing to help us discover the fixes to the vulnerabilities it's discovering? Because, we're coming up with new stuff. And I'm not an expert by any means on the types of attacks and the types of vulnerabilities, targeted at like the AI agents or LLMs. But I've heard of things like poisoning. What's the defense against poisoning the LLM? Is there a defense?
Rolling back outside of pen testing, secure by design.
Right.
Right. I think the attacks that are happening against LLMs and AI, while they are highly tuned for the systems of today, the actual attack vectors and the methods of attack and understanding these things are at least 20 years old. Right. So they've evolved for the times, but validating inputs, validating outputs, and the testing around those things are fundamental, but we may have forgotten to do it again this time. Right.
So I would assume that there's some level of the pen testing that you guys do that's what I would call old school, hands on the keyboard. It's a person, not a series of tools. Is that needed in the future? Is that needed now as we're still needed? Or
absolutely, probably even more so, right? I think...
How so?
So, if I look at the tools that are being used, tools are getting smarter, it's great, right? But the transition from taking those tools into, say, a managed service or a SaaS penetration testing type of thing is that the data that you're running these tests, you're bringing that data back, and you are incrementally improving your tool based on the findings of your tool. But your tool can only find certain things, right? And so you need a research team that sort of helps add a few pieces. So you're limited by that, right? What I am seeing is that that process of a tool with AI and then trying to learn that process is very limited. It's a very linear path, and it's going to tap out, right? What I'm seeing from my side, from the penetration testing side, is that all pen testers always use different types of tools. That's where you start from, right? It makes sense. We're expensive people, right? And really investing in how do I learn from the people that actually have the real skills, and applying that back into these systems, right? And that's one of the things that has attracted me to Cobalt is that there are many thousands of people like me, like yourself in those past years, right, that are out there that love this work, have very specialized skills, right, which are irreplaceable in these parts, right? And so, how do I tap that community and get them focused on, deals and environments? The scanners found this level, the automatic triaging found this, the AI found these levels out here, and now I know these things. So here is an oracle of this type of system here is it's all on AWS. There are assisting people in the world that really know and can reliably exploit these things. I know who you are, let's bring you in to do those 4 hours, 8 hours of work, right?
So the LLMs and the AI have not yet learned the tenacity, the OCD aspect of how we approach the problem.
That's great, but those AI tools require data and voluminous data to learn, right?
Sure.
And at a higher end, first of all, those people don't generate that volume of data, right? And it's so specialized, it's never going to be in that space, right? I think we'll just constant elevation, the tools will get smarter, but the need for the specialized skills will continue to grow.
Right.
And I think the other part that's reflecting on this really is that many people sort of maybe misunderstand the pen testing and the goals of this.
Right.
And they look at, let's run a vulnerability scanner, let's run a managed service so we can understand.
Let's check the box. Let's say what it is.
We can check the box, but their understanding really is, let's find the vulnerabilities that we can go fix, right? Because these things will be found by our adversaries.
Right.
And I think the switch that we need, and hopefully at RSA, this mindset really is that many of the tools are based on detecting and stopping other tools. The reality, though, is your adversary is a human.
Right.
And those humans have access to those tools, and generally slightly better tools on average.
Yeah, I get
right.
it.
And so if you are building
like what in
tools,
education we call teaching to the test.
it's correct.
It
right?
misses a larger
Correct. And so, if you understand that the pen testing part, and especially that evolution of pen testing, the offensive side is you are understanding the adversary, right? And everything about matching tools and matching vulnerabilities that can be discovered through automatic ways gets you into a okay state, not into a preventative state for modern threats.
Right. Gotcha. Well, pen testing is one of my favorite topics. We could talk for hours. But our time is up. I do want to thank you for joining us today to tell us a little bit about your view of pen testing and all the good or scary things yet to come here with AI and LLM. For our audience, if you want to learn more about Cobalt, what they do, and especially get a copy of the pen test report, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I'm looking forward to it, you can go to securityweekly.com/Cobalt RSAC. And to find information for all of the RSAC 2025 coverage for cybersecurity, Cyber Risk Alliance, you can go to securityweekly.com/just RSAC. Thanks again, Gunter, for joining us today, and may the root prompt be with you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.